Welcome back to The Last Climb. This is Alex, and today I'll cover the K2 winter climb that was doomed from the start. Ego, and a rivalry she couldn't let go of, pushed her onto the most dangerous mountain on Earth in the worst season imaginable, and she dragged her team straight into it. I'll need to warn you, the way this ends is brutal, and it's not something you'll shake off. It was January 8th, 2017, and K2 Base Camp sat frozen on the Baltoro Glacier at roughly 16,400 feet, buried under a silence that had nothing to do with peace. The temperature hovered around minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind came in gusts that snapped tent fabric like gunshots and drove ice crystals into every gap between layers. The glacier beneath camp groaned and shifted, deep sounds that rose through boot soles. In summer, this place would have held dozens of expeditions. In January, it was nearly empty. 3 small teams had set up in separate clusters, their tents the only color against gray rock, white ice, and the massive pyramid of K2 rising above it all. 28,251 feet of limestone, ice, and wind. The mountain dominated the skyline in a way photographs never captured. It was geometric and hostile, its flanks too steep to hold snow in most places, its ridgelines sharp enough to seem artificial. Winter K2 had never been summited. Every expedition that had tried, stretching back decades, had been beaten back by conditions that made the mountain's already savage reputation seem generous. Wind speeds above 25,000 feet routinely exceeded 80 miles per hour. Temperatures with wind chill dropped below minus 70. The jet stream sat directly on K2's upper pyramid through the winter months, stripping the mountain of anything trying to cling to it. Fingers stopped working, faces froze, minds slowed to a crawl. I need you to hold on to that for a second. Entire national expeditions, large teams, deep funding, decades of experience had thrown everything at this mountain in winter and come back empty. That's the objective we're talking about here. Among the 3 expeditions was a small Polish team, organized by Otylia Kasperzak, a 34-year-old mountaineer from Krakow. Otylia had come to climbing through competitive cross-country skiing, racing on the Nordic circuit until a shoulder injury ended her career at 24. The transition happened quickly. She was fit, disciplined, and possessed the endurance base that made high-altitude suffering more tolerable than it was for most. Within 4 years, she had summited Manaslu with full guide support and then Broad Peak the following summer without a personal guide, organizing a small Polish team and reaching the summit via the standard route. That unguided summit gave her legitimate credibility among sponsors and permit authorities. She held solid winter alpine credentials as well, hard ice routes in the Tatra, multi-day winter climbs in the Bernese Oberland, and Mont Blanc Massif. In 2015, she joined a larger Polish team attempting Nanga Parbat in winter. That expedition pushed to Camp 3 at roughly 23,000 feet before a storm settled over the mountain and erased the remaining window. The attempt gave Otylia a winter 8,000-meter entry that carried real weight. 23,000 feet in winter conditions was serious, but it was still a long way from the 28,000-foot commitment that winter K2 demanded. 1 guided summit, 1 unguided summit, and a winter attempt that reached 23,000 feet before the weather killed it. A real resume, more than most people will ever do. But for winter K2, I kept looking at it and thinking she needed another 5 years before this made sense. Her identity had been built around Poland's tradition of winter Himalayan climbing. She grew up idolizing the Polish ice warriors who pioneered winter ascents when no one else thought it possible. She positioned herself as the next chapter, though the broader Polish mountaineering community viewed her with quiet skepticism, but she had an audience. Her social media following had grown large enough to attract sponsors, a gear company, an energy drink brand, and a Polish outdoor magazine documenting the expedition. The original plan was a 2017 to 2018 attempt, a full year of preparation, larger team, more funding, and time to rehabilitate the torn meniscus she had suffered the previous spring. The injury required a partial meniscectomy that left the knee functional but permanently compromised. Her surgeon was direct. The remaining cartilage would wear faster under sustained impact. No hard deadline, but the trajectory was clear. She could feel it in the stiffness every morning and the ache after every descent. That knee becomes important later. I want you to hold on to it. Then Weronika Mazur announced her own Winter K2 expedition for 2017 to 2018. Weronika and Otylia had come up through the same Polish alpine clubs, summited together on earlier peaks. but the relationship had cooled into something neither would call rivalry out loud, but both understood in private. Weronica had stronger technical credentials, harder roots, more winter experience, a quiet reputation that no social media following could manufacture. If Weronica reached K2's summit in winter first, the narrative Ottilia had spent years constructing would belong to someone else. Ottilia moved everything up by a full year. Smaller team, less funding, incomplete rope-fixing plan for the upper mountain. Her base camp manager, a Polish logistics coordinator named Marek with years of Karakorum experience, expressed concern from the start about the compressed timeline. But Ottilia held the permits and the funding, and the expedition moved on her schedule. So, just to make sure we're all tracking, she took an expedition that needed a full year of preparation, cut it in half, went in with a smaller team, less money, and a knee her surgeon had already flagged, all because another woman announced a climb for the season she originally planned. That decision right there is where everything that follows starts. Her climbing Sherpas were recruited from Nepal. Chewang Lendu was 36, a veteran of 12 8,000-meter summits who had spent 15 years in high-altitude guiding. He was quiet, meticulous, and supported his daughter's education in Kathmandu with the income these contracts provided. Winter bonus pay was substantial, which was the primary reason anyone agreed to work K2 in January. His partner was Sonam Chotar, 28, with 5 8,000-meter summits and a cautious disposition. Sonam had married the previous autumn and taken this contract because the pay would cover 2 years of expenses in a single season. Chewang's daughter and Sonam's new wife. Those are the people waiting at the other end of this contract. I kept thinking about that as the rest of this unfolded. Neither Sherpa appeared in Ottilia's social media with any consistency. Her posts framed the expedition around her personal story, the knee, the comeback, the legacy, with minimal mention of the Pakistani HAPs and Nepali Sherpas doing the actual work. At base camp, she recorded a video diary that referred to Chewang as her Sherpa, language that reduced a man with more high-altitude experience than she would ever accumulate to a possessive pronoun and a job title. Her Sherpa. 12 8,000-meter summits, 15 years of keeping people alive at altitude, and she filed him under my. That framing tells me everything about how she saw the people around her on that mountain. The first rotation reached Camp 1 at roughly 20,000 feet. Ottilia moved adequately on the ascent, but struggled with the cold in ways that surprised Chewang. Winter K, too cold, was categorically different from anything in Europe. It conducted heat away from exposed skin in seconds and punished every lapse in layering management. Her glove transitions were slow and reactive. She waited until her fingers were numb before switching to warmer mitts rather than managing warmth proactively. More concerning was her knee. On the descent, Chewang watched her down climb and saw a stiffness in her right leg that went beyond fatigue. She favored the joint on steep terrain, shifting weight to compensate for limited range of motion. He mentioned it to Sonam privately. Neither was sure the base camp manager had been told the full picture. During that rotation, Ottilia insisted the filmmaker accompany them to Camp 1, adding weight to loads already stretched thin. Sonam ended up carrying a camera bag in addition to his own gear, slowing the rotation by nearly 2 hours. Chewang raised the issue through Marek. Ottilia overruled it. When Chewang pushed a second time, the response carried an edge. She told him, through Marek, that logistics decisions were not his to make. 15 years on 8,000-meter peaks, and he's told to stay in his lane by someone whose winter high altitude ceiling was 23,000 feet on someone else's expedition. That's the dynamic on this expedition, and it never got better. The second rotation targeted Camp 2 at 21,500 feet. Winds hit 60 miles per hour on the approach. Their tent nearly ripped from its anchors before all guy lines were set. A gust caught the unsecured side before Sonam threw his weight onto the fabric. He spent 2 hours outside in the wind, reinforcing the shelter, while Ottilia waited inside. When conditions failed to improve, they retreated. That evening, Ottilia posted a photo from Camp 2, herself in goggles, ice crusting her mask, captioned about strategic patience. The caption described the retreat as her decision. No mention of Sonam's 2 hours in the wind. No mention that the call to descend originated with Chewang. I've gone through enough of these stories to see the pattern, and it's always the same. The person who contributes the least controls the narrative, every single time. Back at base camp, she checked Werenika's social media. Werenika had posted training photos, winter climbing in the Tatras, heavy load carries. Otilia studied the posts longer than she would have admitted. That detail is small, but it stuck with me. Sitting at base camp on the most dangerous mountain on Earth and scrolling through a rival's training photos. That's where her mind was. By late January, the expedition was approaching its practical limits. Food and fuel were finite. Marek indicated operations would need to wind down within 2 weeks. Then the forecast shifted. A narrow weather window appeared, 36 to 48 hours of reduced wind above 25,000 feet. Speeds predicted to drop from 80 plus to 30 or 40 miles per hour. The first real opportunity of the season. Chewang and Sonam evaluated the window and concluded it was insufficient. Too short, the upper camps not fully stocked, and even the reduced winds far beyond safe margins. They recommended ending the expedition. Marek supported their assessment and told Otilia directly via radio. Otilia disagreed, not with anger, with a controlled, measured certainty that Chewang later said unnerved him more than shouting would have. She acknowledged their assessment, thanked them, and systematically dismantled it. She framed their caution as conservatism she could not afford. She noted another expedition was also eyeing the window. She did not mention Weronika by name, but the urgency was audible. This was likely the only window, and if she went home without a serious attempt, her timeline collapsed. Her knee would be worse by then. The math only worked if she moved now. 3 people with direct knowledge of this mountain told her not to go. She thanked them and went anyway. I'm not sure what else anyone could have done at that point. She pushed a position at Camp 3 with Camp 4 as a possibility only if conditions held. Chewang initially refused. He told Marek over radio that the window was insufficient and he would not take a client above Camp 2 in these conditions. Otilia's response was calm and final. She would go with or without Sherpa support, and she began preparing her pack. Chewang agreed to climb to Camp 3 on 2 conditions. They would not push higher unless the updated forecast showed improvement, and if he called for descent, there would be no discussion. Otilia accepted the terms. Marek formally outlined the remaining risks over radio and documented her acknowledgement. Then the team prepared to move. They departed Camp 2 on a morning where the ambient temperature sat around minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The Abruzzi above Camp 2 demanded sustained technical climbing, steep mixed terrain where every step required deliberate crampon placement. The cold entered through seams, through zippers, through every gap in layering systems designed to prevent exactly this. Otilia's knee announced itself within the first hour. The cold had stiffened the joint overnight, and she could no longer disguise the limited range of motion. She favored her right leg on steep sections, planting her left foot higher and pulling through rather than pushing evenly. The imbalance slowed her significantly between 22,000 and 23,500 feet. Chewang and Sonam adjusted pace to match, watching time bleed away they could not afford. They reached Camp 3 at roughly 24,000 feet exhausted. The tent was barely functional. Wind damage had torn a fly seam, the vestibule zipper, partially frozen open. Sonam reinforced it, while Otilia rested inside and Chewang melted snow. That evening, Marek relayed updated weather data. The window was closing ahead of schedule, wind speeds at 26,000 feet ticking upward, the high pressure system weakening faster than models predicted. Chewang reviewed the data and urged immediate descent at first light. Otilia refused. She told Chewang they would push toward Camp 4 in the morning and evaluate as they climbed, and added that the filmmaker at Camp 2 still had no footage above 24,000 feet, meaning the expedition had produced nothing her sponsors could use. Chewang's response was the most direct of the entire expedition. At those altitudes in winter, evaluating as you climb meant committing to conditions you could not safely retreat from. Ascending gave options. Descending in a storm above 25,000 feet gave nothing. Otilia listened, thanked him, and repeated her plan. It was just the 3 of them above 24,000 feet. The part that's hard for me to move past is how she thanked him. Not dismissive, not rude, polite enough to close the conversation without hearing a single word. I'd almost rather she had argued. At least that would have meant the warning landed somewhere. They departed Camp 3 in pre-dawn darkness. Otilia's knee was worse. The joint had stiffened further overnight, and her first steps carried a hitch both Sherpas cataloged silently. The route above Camp 3 climbed through rock bands and ice fields, terrain alternating between technical mixed climbing and exposed traverses. Their small team had only fixed ropes on critical sections, leaving gaps where all three moved roped together at 50-foot intervals. By 24,500 feet, the signs were there for anyone trained to read them. Spindrift had picked up, thin streams of snow blowing off ridgelines above in patterns that indicated wind acceleration at higher altitude. The plume off K2's summit pyramid, modest at dawn, was thickening and bending sharply east. Chiwang watched it between steps. He had seen plumes like that before, and they never meant the window was holding. He communicated his concern to Sonam with a look that required no translation. Neither said anything to Otilia. They were already committed to the conditions Chiwang had warned about the night before. At approximately 25,200 feet, the window collapsed. Wind speeds surged past 70 miles per hour within minutes, scouring the face with ice particles that stung through every layer. Visibility dropped to near zero. Wind chill plunged below -70. The mountain had decided. When I tell you the window collapsed, I don't mean it got worse gradually. It went from holdable to unsurvivable in minutes. And they were 1,000 feet above the nearest shelter, with nowhere to go but back down through it. Chiwang called for immediate retreat. For the first time on the expedition, there was no argument. They turned and began descending terrain now coated in verglas. Thin, transparent ice formed when wind-driven moisture froze on contact with rock. Every foothold became uncertain. During the descent, Otilia's goggles iced over. She stopped and removed them to clear the buildup, exposing her face to the full wind for several seconds. Frostbite began immediately on her nose and cheeks. Rather than continuing with impaired but functional vision, she stopped completely and demanded Chiwang fix the goggles. Sonam anchored above, while Chiwang stripped his outer mitts, working in liner gloves that offered almost no thermal protection at -70 wind chill. He cleared the lens, adjusted the seal, fitted them back on her face. Less than 2 minutes. But 2 minutes of liner glove exposure at those temperatures carried consequences. Otilia said nothing about the trade he had just made. They resumed descending. That moment right there is the one I kept coming back to. Chiwang strips his mitts in -70 wind chill to fix a problem she created and gets nothing. Not a word. And those 2 minutes in liner gloves follow him off the mountain. Remember that when we get to the end, below 24,500 feet, they reached an unfixed section, steep verglas-coated rock, where all three moved on the same rope. Chiwang led the descent. Otilia moved in the middle. Sonam anchored from above. The step was unremarkable. Otilia planted her right foot on angled rock, weighted it, and felt the knee buckle. Not dramatically, but with the slow structural failure of a joint performing beyond its capacity. The cartilage-depleted surface couldn't stabilize under lateral load. Her crampon scraped verglas without catching. She fell, the knee, the one her surgeon warned her about, the one that had been deteriorating visibly for days while she ignored it. I'd been waiting for this moment since base camp, and honestly, so had Chiwang and Sonam. They just couldn't say it. She tumbled downward past Chiwang's position. The rope snapped taut and ripped him off his stance. On verglas, there was nothing to brace against. He was dragged across rock and ice until he impacted an outcrop with his right side. The force destroyed his knee, torn ligaments, tibial plateau fracture. The system loaded onto Sonam's anchor above. The sudden rope jerk ripped his outer mitt partially off his right hand, the rope catching the cuff and peeling it back. The mitt stayed on its wrist leash but no longer covered his fingers. His anchor held. Otilia had pendulumed roughly 40 feet before the rope arrested her against a rock band. The impact cracked her helmet, broke ribs on her left side, and fractured her left forearm. She hung semi-conscious on the harness, body already beginning the irreversible heat loss that altitude and immobility guaranteed. Sonam secured his anchor, pulled the damaged mitt over his hand as best he could, and descended to Chiwang. Chiwang's right knee was finished, swelling fast, unable to bear weight, but he was conscious and functional above the waist. Together, they reached Otilia and hauled her back onto the traverse. She was hypothermic. Frostbite had advanced across her nose, cheeks, and fingers. Her eyes opened when spoken to, but focused slowly. They could not carry her. 2 men, one with a destroyed knee, on a steep traverse and 70-mile-per-hour wind. The only option was to get her moving with support on both sides. What followed was measured in feet, not miles. Otilia managed short sections, 10 steps, 15, before stopping. Each stop bled warmth that could not be replaced. Her responses to prompting became slower, then absent, then mechanical. Chi Wang hobbled beside her on a knee that sent white signals of pain through his body with every step, refusing to let go of her arm. Sonam worked the rope and broke trail through conditions that would have challenged him fresh. Camp 3 was below them. The tent was below them. Warmth and shelter were close enough that the cruelty of the distance was worse than the distance itself. At approximately 24,200 feet, roughly 200 vertical feet above Camp 3, Otilia sat down on the snow and did not stand up again. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes were open but flat, emptied of everything behind them. No fear, no recognition, no fight. Sonam tried to lift her. She did not resist. She did not respond. Her body had made the decision her mind could no longer make. They stayed longer than they should have. Chi Wang's knee had swollen so severely, his pant leg was taut against the joint. Sonam's right hand had 3 fingertips that were waxy white and completely numb. Every minute they remained was a minute closer to the mountain taking all 3. The calculation was not complicated. It was just unbearable. 200 feet. That's the number I can't stop turning over. The tent was 200 vertical feet below where she stopped. On a clear day, you could see the fabric from where she sat down. I don't think mountaineering has a crueler distance than that. They left her where she sat. Sonam had to pull Chi Wang's arm to get him moving. Not because Chi Wang believed she could be saved, but because leaving someone behind required a kind of permission the mountain never gave. They descended to Camp 3, crawled inside the tent, and spent the night in conditions that would have been desperate even without injuries. Wind hammering the shelter, cold seeping through the floor, Chi Wang's knee immobilized, and Sonam's hand wrapped in every piece of dry fabric they could find. Neither spoke about what they had left 200 feet above them. In the morning, they descended to Camp 2, a descent that should have taken hours but stretched across most of the day. Chi Wang dragged his right leg through terrain that punished weakness, using his ice axe as a crutch on sections where the angle demanded 2 working knees. Sonam broke trail and anchored every steep section alone. In Islamabad, Chi Wang's knee was confirmed as a torn ACL, with a tibial plateau fracture requiring surgical reconstruction. The damage left him with permanent limited range of motion. He never worked above 20,000 feet again. The career that defined his life reduced to base camp logistics, coordinating loads he would never carry himself. The liner glove exposure during the goggle repair cost him sensation in 3 fingertips, nerve damage saved from amputation but never fully recovered. Sonam lost the tips of 2 fingers on his right hand, the hand exposed when the rope tore his mitt during the fall. His grip strength diminished permanently, and he stepped back from high-altitude guiding within 2 seasons. He was 30 years old. Otilia Kasperzak's body was never recovered from K2. She was 34 years old. The footage captured at lower camps was never released. Her social media accounts remained active for weeks, still accumulating comments from followers who did not yet know what had happened, encouraging messages beneath posts that now read like artifacts from a timeline that had already ended. Veronica Molzer's 2017 to 2018 expedition was later canceled due to funding issues. No woman summited K2 in winter that year, or the next. Here's where I land after going through all of this. She rushed the expedition by a year to beat a rival whose attempt never even happened. She brought a knee her surgeon told her was failing. She overruled every person who told her to stop. And when the bill came due, she's not the one who paid most of it. Chi Wang coordinates base camp loads now with 3 numb fingertips and a knee that won't bend past 90 degrees. Sonam can't grip an ice axe properly. They went home to the families they were trying to provide for with bodies that will never work the same, because someone decided her timeline mattered more than the people standing next to her.